Hello and welcome to Liberty Asia's video tutorials. Today I'm going to be walking you through how to enter a case into the VCMS. We'll start here on our home page, simply signing in, and presumably we've done the first step in entering a person's information into the system, which is filling in their person's record, their contact record. You would have done that here on the People tab. So now in order to enter a case, I'm going to want to find that contact record, and then I'm going to attach a case directly to that. So again, there are two separate records. One is a person's contact record, and the second is their case record. So I'm going to go here and find the person's contact record who I want to now assign the case to. I can do this simply by going here to the People tab or by using the search bar. So if we use the search bar, I simply type the name of the client who's going to be the case who I'm now adding. I click search, and to go to their people record, I click on their name. Now that I'm brought to their contact record here, in order to attach a case to this record, I scroll down near to the bottom of the form, and I will see a section that says Cases and a button here that says New Case. By clicking this button, I'm brought to the case form. Now you'll see in the contact name that the person's name is already supplied here, so there's nothing else I need to do. And now I simply walk through the rest of this information and fill in whatever information is known at the time. Anything with a field marked in red means that I must fill in information in that field. I cannot leave it blank in order for me to save the record by hitting the submit button here. So now we simply just walk through this case form, filling in whatever information I know. So I can fill in something about the case origin, how the case came to me, perhaps through a referral from another partner NGO. I can type a brief description, just one or two sentences about the overall case. I can designate a date of intake, perhaps the same date as the intake interview was done, perhaps it was today. I can assign it a status. If this is a new case, I'm going to leave it as intake. A consent section here is just to denote the fact of whether or not your NGO has obtained consent from the victim. And then we walk through the proceeding sections here. In the case overview section, it's just as it sounds. I'm sort of providing a summary, general overview of the case. So I can assign a trafficking status for this victim. So perhaps I'm working with an at-risk individual, in this case a child who I've come across in doing prevention or outreach work. Perhaps this is a victim who's actually been exploited, and perhaps I'm receiving them in sort of a repatriation. I can denote a type of case, as many values of these as are necessary. So perhaps if this is an exploitation case, I'm looking at forced labor as well as sexual exploitation. And then again, I can denote a type of exploitation. So perhaps this was a bridegroom for sale and forced marriage as well as forced labor. Any methods of force and coercion. Now, says the name indicated above, this is a child record, so if that's the case, if it's a minor, I can simply select NA or a minor. I can designate the country that this took place in, and then the age of that initial exploitation, so when were they first facing exploitation. You notice that some of the fields don't come up. This is because of dependencies on other fields, so if I were, in fact, to select at risk, now a risk type would present itself to me, and I could simply select a general risk type of why this client has come into my care. Again, we can fill in more information if known about how they left the situation, how that referral came to me. So again, I can say this is coming to me from an NGO partner. I can denote that, the reason for the referral, any other details. And then from these sections, this may look different than your case forms. The case forms are customized according to each of Liberty Asia's NGO partners. So if you have a different section of this, don't worry about it. From here, I'm just walking through a chronological progression of sort of the narrative or the background of the victim's journey. So I'm providing a brief intake assessment here of what are their immediate needs or expectations, a little bit of background about their pre-exploitation situation. So what were they doing prior to either recruitment or their exploitative situation. I do this by just selecting an overall industry for their occupation. So for instance, if they perhaps worked on a family farm, I can select the industry as agriculture, and then the sub-industry, maybe they worked in livestock, they were raising cattle. And I can also make a note of that here. If any income information is known, I can type that. There's also a text box in each of these case sections, so if any other details aren't captured in any of the other fields, I can type them here. There's a section recording some debt information and how their financials may perhaps influence the vulnerability to recruitment. We have a section detailing the methods of recruitment, so where it took place. Perhaps it took place in Thailand, in Bangkok. They were recruited by an acquaintance, but they had only known them about 6 months. We record some information about the transit, the path that the victim may have taken. A section here denoting any immigration information that's known, perhaps if they're out of the country, have they overstayed a visa, etc. Then we come here to sort of more of the details about what their day-to-day situation looked like. So again, how was the job found? What were they promised? So perhaps they were actually promised something in food service as a waitress. I could say here they were provided food service, but when they actually landed in the city, they were forced into domestic work. If any additional employment, so perhaps they're domestic work and they face sexual exploitation as well, I can note that here. Again, similar questions over here of where did the client work? Maybe they worked here in a house or private residence. What did they do? They were doing a service provision, right, since it's domestic work. And they were doing childcare and cleaning and domestic work. Any other notes I can type here in the employment notes section. Then we move on to the conditions of that exploitative situation. So in this case, of that domestic work that we filled in here. So what were their, perhaps they faced physical abuse as well as psychological abuse. Perhaps they were not allowed to contact their family and they weren't really allowed freedom of movement. Perhaps they weren't allowed to leave that house. Any labor rights violations? So in this case, this domestic worker faced very long days, perhaps 17, 18-hour days. They had privacy issues, rest day issues, and perhaps they often faced underpayment as well. I can denote the days of this employment situation. Again, how many days they worked per week, how many hours per day. Any information here in the next section about income, again, what they were promised and what they were received. If they had a contract or not. If they had a contract, could they understand it? Was it provided in their native language? We have a section here denoting some abuse details. And we end the case form here with a large case notes section. So again, this is what's called a rich text. So I can make case notes here that are bold. I can add a picture, I can add a hyperlink, a URL. And this section here is just to cover all the sort of the narrative of the entire case of their journey. When I'm finished typing those notes, I just hit submit. And then this is now the saved case record for that client. So you could be done here. I would urge everyone to go in and fill in the rest of this information if it's known. We have Google Maps integrated into the system. So you can add a geolocational information, a longitude and latitude coordinate according to these 5 categories. So recruitment, transit, employment, accommodation, and abuse. So if I know that they were recruited in Bangkok, I can go ahead and just search for that field here, add recruitment location, and save. And then as soon as I see this red text, if I hit refresh, that will now add an icon for that region, for that geolocational information. Again, the rest of the suite of information, this is what we call the case management tools. So in case relationships, you can relate records to each other. Perhaps if you have 2 siblings presenting at your NGO, you can relate them to each other, or you can add an alleged perpetrator to this case, etc. Support plans are where you're denoting your, recording your formal service provision, so anything like counseling support or repatriation or reintegration support. There are service forms available there. You can add a risk factor here. I'll go through each of these in a separate video. And then you're left here with these open activities, open activities and activity history. This is where you can add to-do lists that will remind you of what to do in the system here. Okay, and thank you very much for your time.